Hello, this is Ishtar. Hello. Welcome to the next episode of The Naked Shaman. I think we're up to number 8 now, so thank you for joining me. I'm going to talk today about spiritual experience and having a spiritual experience and how to have a spiritual experience and what a spiritual experience is and what a spiritual experience is not. Having said all that, although there are some pointers that I can give you, according to my own experience, having said that, it's really down to the grace of the gods and goddesses, the whole thing, which is a bit of a relief really, because most of us, I think, approach the whole business of having a spiritual experience from the point of view of someone who is alone and struggling to reach somewhere. And it is only when you start to get there that you look back down the path, as I do now after 64 years. I look back on my life and I can see how I was guided and how I was carried to the point that I'm at now. And I wish I'd known that then, because there was so much struggle through not just the vicissitudes of life, but also at the same time, from a very, very early age, I think from about the age of 7, when I used to sit up in my bed reading the New Testament, I wanted to have a spiritual experience. I wanted to be in alignment with divinity in some way. I wanted to be feeling right about myself, right about life. And I wanted to, well, at that age, I wanted to know Jesus, or I wanted to know what these miracles were that he performed, and I wanted to understand what it was all about. And it's been a very long journey, and I'm still probably only halfway there, and I'll probably have to come back and at least have one more go at it after this lifetime is over. And I hope I get the chance to do that if it's needed. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I wanted to say, about the struggle. I really like John Lennon's line when he says, life is what happens to you when you're making other plans. That's exactly it. I really like that. I don't like all of his lines, but that one says it, I think. Life is what happened to you when you're making plans to do something else. And when you look back down on your life from a greater vantage point, you see how seemingly small incidents that happened, that you barely took much notice of at the time, were all part of the river that was, providing the flow for you to flow to where you are now. And I hope that doesn't sound too much like platitudes. It's a sort of easy thing to say, and it can sound very cliched. But there is a substance to it, and I'm going to come on to the substance very shortly. This is a time for spiritual experience. This is a time when our ancestors would have had very deep spiritual experiences, because we're coming astrologically into to what some people regard as a quite turbulent period. And it will be turbulent if, depending upon where your values are, and if your values are to get on in the world is more important than anything else, then you might be having some difficulty, because everything's getting shaken up at the moment. We're about to come into the Autumn Equinox on Wednesday, so you may even be listening to this on Wednesday. If so, today is the Autumn Equinox, and it's a time when what we refer to as the liminal walls in shamanism. The liminal walls are these sort of imaginary membranes between the dimensions. And as you will know by now, if you've been listening to me, the shaman journeys into these other dimensions. And we refer to that as going through these liminal walls. But we also feel that the liminal walls are thinner at certain times of the year. And this is one of them. And it's why our ancestors, going back to Neolithic times at least, would have had festivals held at these times. And the most important times to them were the equinoxes, the solstice, which is now is the autumn equinox. And if you remember, in spring we had the spring equinox. Basically, equinox just means the length of the day and the night are the same. And then on the summer solstice, it's the longest day. And on the winter solstice, it's the shortest day. I mean, that's the simplest way of describing it. But there are other days too, and they are about eclipses. And this is where I'm going to come on to something else that's going to be happening in a week's time, which is the blood moon. And this is a very significant time, which most mystics are aware of. And I'll describe to you a bit more about it when we get to that. But I wanted just to point out that this is important. The timing is important because that's when the liminal wars are at their finest. And the world of spirit seems to be much closer to us and much more easily accessible to the shaman who goes into trance. I find myself that the journeys that I have are much, much more visually vivid at these times, and I always look forward to them because they're quite beautiful sometimes. Get taken to some really beautiful places. So this is something to be looking at now if you want to be thinking about how do I tune in myself to the autumn equinox. And I can tell you basically there are two ways to do it. And the first way is about giving thanks. And you've probably heard this a million times before. I mean, it's quite a basic thing that most people that have practiced any kind of spiritual path know, that gratitude opens up the whole cornucopia. It's just like the floodgates open and your cup is overflowing with bliss and ecstasy and the most enlightening spiritual experiences. And this is the interchange. So we give offerings as well through the liminal wars, especially at these times. And so we can put out flowers or fruits. This is what the Harvest Festival that's now come down to us is all about, giving back the fruits of, that wonderful, wonderful hymn. We plough the fields and scatter the good seed on the land, for it is fed and watered by God's almighty hand. And it is, but I would say fed and watered by the spirits of the land. But it's the same thing. And so we give thanks to the spirits of the land at this time. And in giving thanks, if it's done genuinely from the heart and with real gratitude, you can't fake it. You can't give them something because you're not really feeling it in the hope of just getting something back. It's not like buying a lottery ticket. It has to come from the heart. But I don't think it's hard to find this gratitude. We only sometimes just have to look out the window. Even on a rainy day, we've had quite a few rainy days here in Glastonbury the last week or so. And you can't go out because it's the rain's coming down in torrents, basically. But it's still so beautiful. And I look out from my window here in my study and I look out at it and it looks to me like a silver curtain coming down, and I sometimes just sit for a long time just looking at how beautiful it is. Even on the dullest day, there is beauty always to be found in nature, I find anyway, and there's always something to say thank you for. And of course we do need the rain, the gardens need the rain, so we can give thanks for the rain. I've noticed in my life when I started to really appreciate nature and give back my thanks in that way, that it became even more beautiful to me. My perceptions were opened up by the spirits, and they showed me the beauty even more vividly, even more dramatically. The more I gave thanks, the more grateful I became. And just in this very, very simple way, in opening up your heart, you can start to open up to spirit a little bit more. So gratitude is a very good one, but as I say, you can't fake gratitude. But there is something as well that's just as easy to practice, in fact easier, because and it might surprise you because it doesn't really fit into the whole positive thinking, love and light stuff that some spiritual paths teach. And it is actually, I call it disappointment training. It's about disappointment. And I think that might surprise quite a few people. I was surprised as well when I discovered it. There's something that the shaman does, and the shaman that, is a little bit experienced, starts to use whatever is in their life as fuel for transmutation. And a lot of the time we are in a position where we need to transmute our pain, our inner pain, which blinds us from seeing the beauty of everything, which blinds us from prevents us from being able to be grateful for the miracle of this creation. And so there is a lot of work for the shaman to do. When I first began my training, I was taught to do this, to go through my life, right from as far back as I could remember, and relive everything and rethink everything. And I did it to some extent, but really I wasn't in a good state of mind to do that, because I wasn't evolved enough to see it was actually really painful, a lot of it, and I didn't have enough wisdom to revisit my past. But these days I've been doing it again, and I've just been finding it immensely transformative, because it's an alchemical way of using your own pain, in this case disappointment, as fuel for your own transformation, transfiguration, transmutation. And it's that's a fuel that most of us shouldn't have any lack of. And that's not being negative about life, it's just saying what life is. I think it's being realistic about what life is, because this life is not a bowl of cherries. This life is a place to learn. And it seems to me that we learn best from our mistakes. And so we seem to have to make an awful lot of mistakes to get anywhere. And this is the way that we do get on, is by making mistakes and falling down, and it hurts. And it hurts a lot. And we are disappointed. And particularly we are disappointed in this particular setup that we find ourselves in this world today, because most of us have been, kind of duped really into thinking that we can make a successful life for ourselves materially if we just try hard, or if we work hard, if we do well at university. And it's only in recent years a lot of us are beginning to realise that we were never ever going to really do that well, because we're just not in the club. As George Carlin says, there is a club and we're not in it. And that's great, because I wouldn't want to be in that club, especially now we're finding out the initiation ceremonies and what they have to do. It's all coming out now. But not just for that reason. I wouldn't want to be in a club with people that I don't feel very clubbable with. It would be very difficult. We wouldn't get on, let's put it like that. I want to be with people that I get on with. But it takes a long time to realise that, and to realise a lot of the disappointments in life that we've had, and a lot of the pain that we've experienced, has come from perhaps beating ourselves up when there was no way we could have succeeded anyway. We've been a bit about, do you know the story of King Sisyphus? It's a Greek tale, and there are lots of different versions of how it came to be, but in any case, he seemed to annoy one of the gods, well, the king of the gods actually, Zeus. And Zeus was so annoyed with him, he gave him this punishment that he had to push a boulder up a hill. And just when he was getting near to the top of the hill, Zeus would send a wind to send the boulder all the way back down again. And he was cursed for all eternity to have to keep pushing this boulder up the hill. I don't know, maybe I've just had a hard life, but I certainly can relate to that. I can certainly relate to just when you think you're getting somewhere and then, oh no, you've got to go back to the beginning again. And it's just, I think a lot of people do have that kind of life. But I never really knew until I was practicing shamanism and learning from my spirit guides that one, this is an advantage, because one can use it as fuel. If this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have any fuel to put on my alchemical fire. And so I now do something which I call disappointment training, which sounds a bit odd, I know. But usually about once a week when it feels right, I'll just sit for half an hour or so and go back into my life and remember some disappointment that I had. And it can be a very small disappointment that maybe as a child, you wanted a lolly and you couldn't have one or something. But it's just the act of finding a disappointment. It's almost like pulling the end of a thread. And then you start pulling on this thread and suddenly the whole ball starts becoming unraveled. And it's such a relief to be able to allow myself to feel that disappointment, to actually really feel it and then transmute it, let it go, give it to the spirits in whichever way you would feel best to do it. I just ask them to take it to somewhere where it can be used as food for others that would appreciate it and wouldn't cause harm to anyone. I just ask them to take it, and they do. And this is something that it may sound not the sort of thing you'd expect a spiritual teacher to be talking about. It's like, you let go to your disappointment. But anyway, it's really worked for me. And some of the most powerful spiritual experiences I've had are when I've completely let go and to the defeat and disappointment that I'm feeling. And I'll tell you about one of those experiences shortly. But I just want to quickly just mention about the blood moon, because some of you might be wondering about that. I've talked about the blood moon before because we did a ceremony. In fact, I've done a couple of ceremonies now on the part of the Glastonbury Zodiac, which is called the Girt Dog of Langport. And I've done those ceremonies on blood moons. The reason there's an upcoming blood moon, and it's going to also be on the harvest moon at the weekend on the 27th. And the reason why we call it a blood moon is because there are 4 moons, let's say 4 lunar eclipses that are happening in a very short time. And these 4 lunar eclipses, the first one was a year ago. So there were 2 last year, another one this year that I did a ceremony on, April the 4th it was this year. And then the 4th one is due to fall this year on the 27th of September. And this is known to the Jews as the Feast of the Tabernacles. So we've got these 4, they're basically lunar eclipses that are very close together. To have 4 like that, full lunar eclipses in 2 years is unusual. The first 2 fell on what the Jewish call Passover, what we call the spring equinox, and the last 2 fall on the Feast of the Tabernacles. Well, this one and the last one of last year fall on the Feast of the Tabernacles. And this is the time for the Jews when they have their own celebration, they have their own interpretation of this Feast of the Tabernacles. I'm particularly interested in this because it brings me into talking about the Shekinah, which I'm going to come on to shortly. But this has been my experience that I've got to through disappointment. The Shekinah is said to dwell in the Tabernacles in the Holy of Holies. And there's a paragraph in the Zohar which says, one must prepare a comfortable seat with several cushions and embroidered covers from all that is found in the house, like one who prepares a canopy for a bride. For the Shabbat is a queen and a bride. This is why the masters of the Mishnah used to go out on the eve of Shabbat to receive her on the road, and used to say, "Come, O bride, come, O bride," and one must sing and rejoice at the table in her honour. And one must receive the lady with many lighted candles, many enjoyments, beautiful clothes, and a house embellished with many fine appointments. Well, I must say I didn't do any of that. And if that works for some people, then I think that's great. But for me, actually the funny thing is I did buy new sheets the day before, but I didn't know why. This is this thing of, not knowing when your life's going on and it seems to be nothing to do with you, what happens. It's only afterwards I look back and I thought, do you know what? I had bought new sheets the day before. So in a way I had prepared, but I didn't know that I was preparing. It's that time was when I didn't have to practice disappointment. I was actually experiencing disappointment and defeat over the state of the world, over not necessarily about my own life. I mean, my own life is very good. I'm always very satisfied within my own life. I have just enough to live on. I never go hungry. I've got a nice roof over my head. I live in a beautiful place. I don't really have any complaints about my life, but I really do feel sometimes what's going on in the world, and to the point that I sometimes feel that I'm living in hell, because I cannot understand man's inhumanity to man. I cannot understand the killing and abuse of one human being against another that goes on in all the different ways that it does. I can't understand it, and I'm sure you can't either. And sometimes you can block it out, and sometimes you just can't. And so this was one of those times, and I was just lying in bed crying, actually. Not even boo-hoo crying, just tears going down my cheeks. And just this feeling of completely giving up. Having, if I had any power to do anything, I no longer did. And I didn't even have the power to stand up. And I just wanted to lie there, and I didn't want to ever get up again, actually. That's how I felt. I didn't even really want to wake up the next morning and find myself here again in this hell, which is how it can look, to people that want to lead an honest and decent life. It seems all sense of decency is gone. So anyway, I don't want to dwell too much on that, but that's how I felt. So I don't consider that in any way preparing for a wonderful experience, and yet she came. And I refer to it as the descent of the Shekinah, and it's like a firebird. And well, my experience, it's only afterwards I've kind of put it together that it's the Shekinah, it's the firebird. At the time, all that happened was I was lying there, and there was most extraordinary light that came. And it started to try and download into me, and I could see there was all this code coming down as well. But at the same time, it was very loud. It was like the sound of a generator, or perhaps a pneumatic drill. It was really loud sound. It was so loud that it was hurting me. It was deafening me. And I screamed and tried to pull out of it. And I screamed for my spirit guide. I screamed for Ishtar, who's my spirit guide, because I was frightened, actually. It wasn't a blissful experience at all. It hurt, and it was strange. I didn't even know if it was a good thing. I didn't know if I'd been attacked by demons or something. And I do remember thinking at that time as well, I wonder if this is what people experience when they think they've been contacted by ETs, or, somehow they call themselves, don't they, contactees, because they think it's some kind of spaceship coming down on them. And I can understand if people have had no other experience except that, it might seem like that, because that's the only cognitive pigeonhole that you've got to put it in. Anyway, I called to Ishtar, and Ishtar came. And I said, I don't know what this is. And I could still, it was ticking over. It was like a program that was trying to download into me. And it was like I'd put it on pause, I said, I don't know what this is, but what is it? I'm scared. What's going on? And she just gently took me into it. And she said, it's hurting you because you're tensing up. Just relax. As soon as I relaxed, it no longer hurt my ears. And then I was swept away into this wonderful, wonderful experience. And I didn't know for a while what it was, but then I started to hear about the Shekinah, and this is the Jewish divine feminine, the feminine heart of God. And the word Shekinah means dwelling within, coming to live within, and another word for it is nest. So it's like a bird. And she does have these kind of fluttering wings. Sometimes now she starts up inside of me. She has come to live with me. And if I'm in any danger or anything that she feels that she needs to protect me, I start to feel her fluttering. She just comes awake, comes alert, I think that this Shekinah is who it is referred to in the Bible when John the Baptist says of Jesus, "I am baptizing you with water, but one is coming who is greater than me, who will baptize you with fire and light." If I was a Christian, I'd be asking my local vicar what that meant and why the church doesn't offer it. But that would just be crass of me to do that, because I know why, and no one can give this experience. It was entirely a gift of grace, a gift of mercy from the gods, and I did nothing. I did nothing to get it. And this is, again, brings us, I'm just going to finish off now. I want to talk a little bit, just for about 5 minutes, about the myth of Prometheus, because it's the difference of what I just described was a gift of grace that was given to me of the divine fire, of the secret fire. And it can't be stolen, and there are no shortcuts to it. And there's not really much you can do in your life to deserve it. It's way beyond anything any of us can deserve. And so really there's not much we can do to get it, except to be honest and true as much as we can in our lives, and just put one foot in front of the other as the pilgrims that we are walking through this life. That's how it seems to me. So the story of Prometheus is also a story about the secret fire, about the Shekinah. But some people mistake it for meaning, when Prometheus stole the fire of the gods, because a lot of people think these gods are historical, that there was a time on earth when the gods walked on earth, and there was a time on earth when man didn't know how to make fire, which to me I don't think is probably true. They're always trying to date that. They're always trying to find the earliest evidence for when man knew about fire. Well, I should think he's known about fire from as long as he's been on earth, because it's unavoidable. It's one of the basic 4 elements. But in any case, it's not that fire that Prometheus stole. And so I have written a poem about this, which I'm just going to finish off with, because I think in this poem, I've tried to sum up the whole problem of man in terms of wanting to have a spiritual experience to the point of trying to steal it, and then what happens when he tries to steal it, because he's coming from his own small little experience. He's like a child looking through the keyhole of a sweet shop, and he looks at the keyhole and all he can see is a big bar of chocolate, and he thinks that's it, and he doesn't realise there's a whole sweet shop. But he has to stand there and wait for the door to open and to be invited in, instead of trying to work out ways to steal that bar of chocolate, because there's so much more in there than just a bar of chocolate. But sometimes you have to wait for them to open the door until they think you're ready. And I don't know what the criteria is. If the criteria is defeat and disappointment, well, I tell you what, this earthly plane is full of that kind of fuel for us to use. There's no shortage of that fuel. And maybe that's why they have Jesus say, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Because I suppose if you have all these riches, you're constantly distracted. You're not disappointed. You're not in any kind of pain, so you have no fuel to burn. I think it might come down to that. You have no fuel to burn in order to transmute the pain, in order for the gods to be ready to give you the secret fire. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Here's the poem. It's called Prometheus Unchained. When Prometheus stole the fire from the gods, not from the burning star that bathed his limbs, nor the bright peat of the hearth, or flames from the forge, or the embers that smouldered deep within his loins. All these fires were already by man availed. This wasn't the fire that was purloined, but the secret fire no man ever saw unveiled. If forethought was there, what was his tau? The collapse of history, the church and the steeple, pulverized into interstellar dust, back to chaos as refugees swarm like the old sea peoples, the transhuman agenda in ruins at our feet, the artifice in their artificial intelligence laid bare, with Mercury refusing to grace such cheats. The tottering ziggurats are now streaming with blood Ishtar's cup, snatched from her hand, overflows into the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, the Don. High priestesses torn from their purple sheets, hauled into the bazaar like common strippers, the enchantment run through a cost-benefit sheet and swiftly knocked down to the highest bidder. And the moral of his story is, there are no morals anymore. They quickly followed all sense of decency as it was jettisoned out of the door. And yet it is the only boat back to shore. Take it, or be lost at sea in the surging flood released by those old Olympians, and understand now, all those who can, in order to be a god, we must first learn to be a man. So I think that's about it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.